As the media industry focuses on revenue diversification, more and more publishers are venturing into live events, both virtual and in person. Not only can they be monetized in multiple ways, but a well planned event can provide a great venue to forge a deeper connection with your most engaged audience. But events are tricky to pull off and can be intimidating for those who haven't hosted one before. For this episode, I pulled together a panel of people who run some of the most successful events companies in the world. They include Chris Ferrell, CEO of Endeavor Business Media, Brustkern, co-founder of Fintech Nexus, John Allsopp, who runs one of the most influential conferences for web designers, developers, and digital creatives, Ross Douglas, founder of Autonomy Paris, a major trade show, Sarah Peck, a podcaster who launched the Wise Women's Council, Boye Fujimi, co-founder of the Future Party, and Randy Gage, a New York Times bestselling author. In our discussion, we talked about everything including what to charge, picking a host city, finding sponsors, and negotiating with venues. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. Oh, and one more thing. This is actually a recording from my Office Hours series. Several times a month, I pick a topic around media and then invite on the foremost experts on that topic. It's a live discussion that only paying subscribers to my newsletter can attend. And it's not a boring webinar interview. As you'll see in this episode, all attendees are invited to speak up and contribute. It truly is a roundtable discussion. If you want to join in on these office hours, then go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Okay, now on to our session about building a successful events business. Okay, hey everybody, I'm Simon Owens. As you know, this is my my office hours session. One of the things that I do several times a month with my subscribers, mostly paying subscribers, but sometimes there's some people in who get invited by paying subscribers, and I'm always happy when to have those people on these calls. One thing I always try to emphasize at the beginning of these calls is that I do not want to dominate them. Whenever there's an office hours where I end up speaking very little and the people in the audience do most of the talking, those are what I consider to be the most successful office hours. So as people are talking and answering my questions and stuff, if you have follow-up questions or if you have some kind of expertise you want to add, this doesn't have to be necessarily a Q&A with the featured guests the entire time. There are people on here who have their own expertise. So you can definitely speak up and contribute. You can maybe pipe up in the chat to say you want to ask a question, or in some cases you could just unmute. You could do the little raise your hand symbol, or you could just unmute your mic and just kind of pipe in and contribute. So definitely, do not hesitate if you have any questions or anything like that to go ahead and talk. One thing you'll notice is that I put you on mute when you joined in. Whenever you're not talking, please try to remain on mute. Just because we're recording the video for this, so whenever someone is speaking, the camera focuses on them, and so we don't want whenever someone's on mute or off mute when they're not speaking, if they make any sort of noise, the camera will keep on focusing on them, and it gets really distracting. Okay, let's jump into the topics itself. The topic was, let's talk about building an events arm of your media business. This is something that I keep on encountering with more and more creators and media entrepreneurs. They usually start with things like, subscriptions and advertising first to monetize their content, but then eventually they start thinking about, how do I diversify even further? How do I get out and meet my subscribers, who meet my audience? How do I monetize in new ways? And events can be another great way to introduce monetization to your media company. especially since there are multiple ways that you can monetize the event, including, the ticket prices themselves, and then also sponsorships, both of which you can traditionally charge a lot more than you can do through like digital advertising and digital subscription. So it's really exciting and cool thing to do. Something I'm experimenting with a little bit this year. I'm not actually trying to monetize events outside of these like online digital events like we're doing now, but I'm trying to organize, in-person meetings, dinners, and stuff like that, just to kind of, see what it's like to go out and meet my subscribers. So it's been a lot of fun so far. I've already done 2 dinners in New York. I'm going to do one in LA in a few weeks, and then several in DC. So I lined up several amazing featured guests this week. We have Chris Ferrell. He's the CEO of Endeavor Business Media. It's one of the largest B2B publishers in the world. I was just on its website the other day, and it's amazing how many B2B publications fall under this company. So he has, a ton of expertise because he's been putting on events for years. We got Brustkern. He's the co-founder of Fintech Nexus. I think it was originally called Lindit Fintech, but this company actually, I think, started as an events company and then moved more into media. So he can talk a little bit about kind of the reverse, approach to that. We got John Allsopp, and he was gracious enough to wake up early. He lives all the way in Australia. He runs one of the most influential conferences for web designers, developers, and digital creatives. We have Ross Douglas, founder of Autonomy Paris. It's a global event on urban mobility. He can talk about a little bit more about the trade show factor, like the trade show side, as opposed to traditional conferences. We have Sarah Peck. She is a entrepreneurial podcaster, and she runs something called the Wise Women's Council. And she's going to have an interesting perspective because she's one of the few people. Most of the featured guests on here are doing in-person events. She does these things they're similar to masterminds. They're more kind of online digital events. So she can talk about that aspect of it. And then our last minute addition is Boye Fujimi. He's the co-founder of the Future Party, and he also started out on the event side and eventually moved more into media. And so we got a lot of amazing expertise here, and we're going to jump just right into the questions. And again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'll call on you, and we'll just keep it moving. I want to start out with talking with Chris. So Chris, could you let's think kind of like big picture, because like several of these the people on this call haven't actually moved into events yet, and they might be thinking about it. Can you talk about like what kind of factors are best for launching a live event? Like let's say what a media entrepreneur came up to you and you were assessing their publication for whether it's ideal for hosting a conference. What are some questions you would ask them?
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, when we look at launching events, if we have a media property, or we're looking at acquiring a media property with the idea that we're going to launch an event, I want to know sort of how engaged that audience is, what kind of options there are for both the attendees and the sponsors, for events, and where we might sort of fit into the existing ecosystem. And so, I mean, my advice would be to, start small and work your way up, right? So that you don't necessarily want to launch out the gate trying to do a trade show. That you're more likely to have success trying to do, a conference, and, start with one day, or a day and a half. You don't have to launch with a 3-day event. I think it matters where the location is. People they care about what cities they travel to. You're going to have more success either in a sort of destination city, or with a more sort of regional draw, if there are a lot of people in a given area that might come might be willing to make the commitment to come in for a day, but aren't going to, fly across the country to go to a startup event that they've never been to.
Right. So like if you're doing it in the dead of winter, maybe not hosting it in Chicago,
That's right.
maybe Tampa. What about like in terms of like assessing like the likelihood that they will be able to like cuz you're in B2B, like the likelihood that your readership can expense it, like is it senior enough executives, like different things like that. Like is that something you would factor in terms of determining like whether one of your publications should launch an event series?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, on the media side, your clients will give you the benefit of the doubt to support an event, the first time. But if you don't have the attendees show up, they're not going to come back for a second time, right? And so
Yeah.
the bigger challenge is making sure that your audience is going to attend. Um, I mean, I sort of assume that executives, have the budget to go, that it has more to do with the time bandwidth, and so
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're not trying to launch an event, you know, right up against, another major industry trade show that they need to attend, or, if there's some seasonality um, to the industry that you're serving, that, you're not doing it at a time of year when they can't go. So, like if you're trying to launch an event, in healthcare IT or something, you don't want to do it, the couple months around the big national association show, because that's when they're going to take their time to go to that. You're going to have a better luck if you launch it, in sort of the off season for the industry association events.
Yeah, so it sounds like like you really need to do your homework to look at the competitive landscape.
Right.
There's a lot of things that, and we're going to dive into some of these that you're juggling, like in terms of like venue, size of venue, cost of venue, plus where is it actually located, what
Right.
time of year. Like there are a lot. It seems like it's a pretty sophisticated decision process in terms
Yeah.
of, you
Yeah.
know, all these factors that come into play.
Yeah, so we launched an event last year for electric utility. So we have a publication called T&D World that's all about the distribution of electric power. There's a big industry show that's in the spring, and so we launched our show in the fall, and we planned it in a city where we knew that we had the local utility. Duke Power was willing to be the sponsor, and so we did it in Charlotte, and so we tried to do it, where it wasn't running up directly against, in either time or geography, the big industry show that we were essentially going to be a small competitor to.
Yeah, interesting. If anybody, Chris is one of the most experienced people in B2B media. So if you have any questions, definitely speak up or pipe into the comments that you want to ask a question.
He's
But
telling you that I'm old.
but in the meantime, I want to talk a little bit about, you touched on pricing. Sarah, you run this Wise Women Council, and I remember interviewing you, and you were talking about how you gradually raised your prices, and this is something I've struggled with. I always have this bad tendency to be I'm not very confident about pricing. I always underprice stuff. You gradually pushed up prices to where you were charging upwards of $7,000 per person who was participating. Can you talk about that, like how to test the different price points and figure out like what is like the max, like because you want to create a balance, like what can you get people to pay and how do you get the maximum number of people to participate, or the number of people that
Yeah,
you actually want
yeah.
to participate? Yeah.
It's such a science and it's such a science and an emotional journey at the same time. Like there's both the art and the science of it. I so it the pricing we started at like $1,200 to $1,800, and I ran a 3-month mastermind. And part of the way that I think about it is through experimentation. So just, will people buy this? What's the smallest thing I can do? I put together a 12-week program, and what do I need to pay the bills? Like what do I have to do to pay the people that I work with, the operators, the teachers, whoever. I'm a small business owner, by the way. I have
Mhm.
5 coaches and 5 contractors, but I'm the only employee in my business. And then usually I over deliver and I say, well, I just delivered $2,500 worth of services and I'm confident in that. And so I set that for next time and explain to people why I'm raising prices. But a lot of times I have to deliver services to discover the value and then iterate on pricing. And my pricing has gotten to, we're $6,400 for the year right now, which is actually technically cheaper than last year because we were an 8-month program and now we're 12 months.
Yeah.
But the price looks higher for the consumer. So we're switching to $475 a month for people. So we're switching to a monthly payment plan so that what they see isn't the net, even though they can do the math.
So you're almost treating it like a subscription.
Yeah. So I've doubled since we last talked. We used to run once a year for 8 months, March to November, and now we opened year. So March and October, the new classes start in April and November. So I'm running it year round. And the reason I was able to get there is because I'm no longer running all the calls. So I have coaches leading different calls, and I can still go on vacation in August and December.
Yeah. And, one thing that I've noticed that gives me a little bit more confidence, I'm guessing you experience the same, is I constantly get feedback from people saying, you're not charging enough for this. Like when you were hosting these, these sessions, were you getting that feedback from your paying customers that I would pay X for this, you're undercharging at all?
Yes, but customers lie. So it's a tricky thing. People will say, oh, I had someone say like, you should be charging double for this. And then the next time I said, my prices have doubled. And they're like, oh, we can't afford you anymore. And I was like, great. They're not always accurate assessors. What they're communicating to you is I got a lot out of this and I got a lot of value. But when you're putting price on your website or wherever, when you're communicating it, to me, it's always a conversation about how do I communicate to them that this is so much value for them in a language that they will understand. And some key moves that I had to make is I used to position as a community. I was a community for working moms and for mompreneurs and CEO moms. And people will only pay so much for community. They'll pay a lot more for a leadership incubator. They'll pay a lot more for a coach, and they'll pay a lot more for a mastermind. And I was providing all of those things, but I wasn't positioning accurately. So if I say, like, what would you pay for an executive coach? 10K, 15K, 25K this year? Like, these are CEOs. And the value positioning is you need someone to help you make decisions. You need someone who can think like a COO. That person would be 150, 250K if you added them to your business. We're giving you a community of peer CEOs for $4,500 or $6,500. This is a fractional cost of a CEO, but you have more people helping you, plus coaches you can talk to every month. Wow, now I feel like I'm selling, but I'm
No. I mean, you haven't been on any of these before, but there have definitely been people like on these calls who have, reached out to, featured guests to work with them in some capacity. So I wouldn't be surprised if you receive some emails after this. Emmanuel, sorry.
My market is mom. So I don't know if that's who's on the call, but if you know a mom or you work with women who need support, you are welcome to reach out.
Yeah. So, Emmanuel, like you run French Morning, which is a really popular news site for French expats living in the US. You had a question about utilizing events to sell subscriptions.
Yeah, exactly. We've been doing events mainly online. We do also physical events, but it's really B2C approach. So it's very different from a B2B approach. But what we have obviously is an audience that's very interested in some kind of technical issues like immigration, taxes between two countries, all of that stuff. So we do weekly events about that. But the way we monetize them right now is only by having the speakers actually pay. It's lead generation for them, right? It works very well. It allowed us to have new advertisers that were not really interested in, having a banner, having an article or whatever, but are really interested in being engaged with our audience. And it's, of course, a big service for the audience. They don't care if the expert who speaks actually paid for it because they are really experts. So, and there is a lot of leads generated through that. But the question I had, so it's great, it works, but I'm trying to see if I can get even more from it. By trying to, because I'm thinking about, finally going into subscriptions for my audience, which have shied away from so far because maybe I was not confident enough in our contents. But I see we have great engagement, so obviously it's a great basis for that. And my question was, does anyone have experience with using those events as kind of part of the package, not only to advertise your product like you would do with a podcast? We do that. You have a free podcast, and then you hope that people who listen to your free podcast are going to become paid subscribers, but more having the live the online events part of the package where you have to pay to be you have to be a member basically.
Yeah.
Or we could think maybe we're thinking maybe you have to pay to participate into the webinar which is free now for the audience.
Yeah.
But if you're a subscriber, then it's free for you. These kind of things.
Yeah, so like maybe like for a live event, even you pay $1,000 for your ticket, but that gets you also a year's subscription to the publication or something.
That kind of thing.
Ross, you run a trade show. I know you were thinking about moving into paid subscriptions. Have you thought about offering like kind of what Emmanuel's talking about? For the price of admission, you also get a paid subscription to your newsletter or something like that.
Yeah, so thanks. Nice to be on this evening with you guys. So we started our business with a classic trade show in Paris, on sustainable urban mobility solutions, and it's quite a difficult thing to get enough critical mass for a trade show. And at the same time, we started just a classic newsletter, and then we looked at ways of monetizing that newsletter, and then we stopped the trade show and we went fully digital. And we made money by doing a digital trade show on a French software platform called Swapcard. So, Emmanuel, you can actually run a digital event. I mean, obviously, your audience physically spread out all over America. And I imagine there's a lot of your audience sitting in France thinking of going to America. So you could probably do, some digital type of trade show because, like you say, a lot of your content is from experts who are happy to pay because they are lawyers or immigration lawyers or accountants, whatever the case is. But our business, we did three things. So the first is a classic trade show. It was always difficult to get critical mass. Then we went into digital media. COVID hit, and we made money out of that, mainly through webinars, white papers, and a digital trade show where we charged our exhibitors money to basically talk, much way as Emmanuel did it, and our visitors came in for free. And we had, 4,000 or 5,000 visitors attending and jumping into the different chats. You have 4 or 5 different digital stages at the same time. When COVID stopped and people went back to physical, we went back to physical events and really found it very hard to monetize digitally or with media, even though we invested quite a lot of money on that. And then we started a new product, which started working really well. And we do a conference in different cities. We call them city summits. We have one in Berlin, one in London on different subjects. And those started making money, and they had a very high renewal rate for the simple reason that we were able to get on stage important companies like Bosch alongside important policymakers like Transport for London or Department of Trade that they need to be cooperating with. In London, our events about autonomous vehicles. In Berlin, it's about shared mobility. So what we understood was that these actors wanted to be on stage together. And most importantly, they wanted to be seen on stage and photographed on stage, and then that communicated out through LinkedIn, because that demonstrated that they were, working alongside government and not just being reckless and trying to, deploy different types of autonomous vehicle technology without working alongside the right policymakers. And that was something we never really thought of. We just thought it'll be an interesting conference. But once that content was shared on LinkedIn, that was the stickiness. So now what we're seeing more and more is that if you have clients that want to, demonstrate what they're doing publicly through LinkedIn, that's extremely valuable. And you can monetize that with a conference with, good press photographs, good PR, and obviously they bring their own, the PR people, and they use their own smartphones and they photograph and post that on LinkedIn. So we generate a lot of media at our conferences just because everybody was communicating on LinkedIn, and we just videoed the whole thing and then pushed it up. And that worked better than us, spending a lot of time writing newsletters, which we still do, and writing long white papers, which we still do, and reports. Our audience now really sits on LinkedIn, which is something we've learned. Yeah.
So those people who were on the stage, were they paying to be up there?
Correct. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's a very simple format. We have three sources of revenue. Our main revenue is from, we call them, you know, a content partner or headline partner. They're sponsors basically, and they're paying to be up on stage. Then we invite what we call institutional partners. So the government people that, you know, make the decisions about transport, because our focus is on mobility and transport. So that's our main source of revenue. We make a little bit of money out of tickets and a small amount of money. For next year, we're starting to sell some little, they call them desktop stands. So you can have a little mini booth, you know, and you can put your little stand-up thing there and you can attract some clients. But we are seeing the demand now for two things. One is to communicate your message out to an audience physically, not very big, but digitally to a large audience through LinkedIn. And then the second thing we're seeing money for is for the right type of lead generation. So people are really, our clients are really looking for quality lead generation. And so we've invested in a data engineer, and we're spending a lot of time and energy figuring out how to match make, you know, the right person with the right lead.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like, you know, there's with traditional publications, there's more of a firewall between advertising and content. But it seems the more I talk to events people, not only are they more comfortable with blending those two, but they say the audience, you know, is more comfortable with it as well, and actually wants to hear from like the leading vendors, you know, in their industry. I was just speaking at a conference a few weeks ago, the Digital Book World Conference, and they had a lot of, you know, kind of sponsored paid presentations from, you know, the actual sponsors for the event. And it seemed like for the most part, the audience was there to actually watch that. You know, speaking of kind of sponsorships, that's another great thing to talk about. Boye, you run the Future, or you're the co-founder of the Future Party, which is started as an event series and still does events that really kind of caters to like the creative industry, people who work within the creative industry. As you like approach sponsors and work with sponsors, what are they looking to get out of an event that they can't get, you know, from traditional media?
For sure. I think in our case, they really just want to get in front of the audience. And so kind of what you were saying earlier, we had built our media brand kind of backwards. So instead of kind of having the content and then doing the events, we started with community. And so we were able over several years to sort of create a framework, a name for ourselves, and really at the end of the day, a story. And when we pitch our story, we talk about the audience and we show the evidence. And in the same way that you might pitch media ad dollars, we use a similar format, but for experiential. I think the nuanced thing with events as well is they're not, advertisers aren't necessarily looking for an ROI. It's very hard to measure the effectiveness of an event at times. The most that they might want for like a B2B type event is, you know, did they convert? But we often work with companies that really want like a big audience to pay attention to what they're doing. And for us, our community are tastemakers and influential people. So we really just lay out and evaluate, hey, this is who will be there. This is who will interact with your brand. This is who you can develop a relationship with. And that's usually what helps sort of sell through whatever experience or activation that we're working on, whether it's dinner, a panel, or some sort of party or branded activation.
Yeah. Well, Emmanuel and Ross said that they're comfortable putting sponsors on the stage. Like when you're doing a panel, like, and to kind of contextualize, you don't just do traditional conferences, you do everything from parties to dinners to you kind of like work with brands to design an entire experience. Like what are you actually offering the brand in most cases? What is their participation?
So we kind of have two different ways that we actually work with brands. So on one end, when it's something, we call them platform events. So when it's something that we own, it's our brand, the brand will have, you know, obviously like a logo. They, will have access. Sometimes we allow them to say some sort of word, whether it's like an introduction or some sort of moderation, so on and so forth. One thing that we've been doing lately is we've almost kind of gone backwards in a way. And so we're approaching these brands and we're saying, yeah, you could, here's concepts that we have, but what do you need done? So almost like a traditional agency model, except the nuance is that they aren't just coming to us because they need the execution of whatever they want to accomplish. They also want the cultural cosign that we bring. So we are essentially a media partner who is producing an activation that they already know that they want to do. And now in some instances, we're tacking on our logo, we're tacking on our audience, we're requesting ways that we want to be integrated into something that they already want to happen. So that's one thing that we found lots of money in and massive success doing, that not a lot of people necessarily do from what we've seen.
Yeah.
And Simon, just quick, just
sure.
a quick difference.
Sure.
We're a B2B event, not a B2C event. So our clients are not really trying to sell something. They're trying to figure out how to change mobility from combustion to electric. And that's something that governments want to do and cities want to do. So there's not this sort of tension between policy makers and the kind of innovators. There's more like we need to work together to transition to sustainable mobility. But what we do is that we've built up a neutral brand. So we're not owned by a car federation like a lot of the car shows are. And our objective is very much to move people away from car ownership, which is in line with what cities want. So our brand is politically neutral. And as a result, cities are happy to come and attend our event. And as a result, they're happy to be on stage with companies like, Renault or BNP Paribas or whatever the case may be. But what we really do is that the speaker pays us, but we don't really suggest that they do keynotes. We create a panel with other interesting people, which makes the content more interesting and makes their product or service sound more interesting and attracts and engage an audience. So that curating is important.
Yeah, so making sure that it's not just a sponsor, it's like a whole group of experts so that people feel like it's not just an ad, but there's like a organic discussion going on.
Exactly. As soon as a sponsor goes up with what they call a keynote, it's death. People don't really want to listen because it's just a product or service pitch. So you've got to try and create these panels with your knowledge, with your context, have a city authority in, have a person pro, have against, have some tension. So that's really the skill is getting that piece right.
Yeah. One of the things that, makes me the most nervous about launching an event is the venue. I feel like there's so much stuff that goes into venue selection, times of size of venue. You obviously don't want to get one too large or too small, like pricing, how to figure out like what you're willing to pay the venue. Are you paying them up front? Are you paying them a percentage or something like that? And like, what are the other amenities? Let's start with like Bo on this one. Like when you're evaluating venues, what are the different factors that go into choosing a venue and negotiating, and like what are the things you need to what are the red flags you look for? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about?
First of all, thanks for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. So
and just for you, you're a Fintech Nexus. Your events are about financial technology, and those are the professionals who go to them. Just for some context.
That's right. So we're a B2B conference, and we focus on the buyers and sellers. Where the sellers of technology are the fintechs. They're selling to banks and they're selling to investors. So that's the marketplace that we're enabling. We started the events business out of a fintech. So we were looking for an event to go to. There wasn't one that satisfied us. And so we created one, and we had a mailing list of about 3,000 people, invited everyone to join us, and started in a Convene conference center in Midtown Manhattan. So that was our first thing that we did. Was, on a price per square foot basis, it's expensive, but it's one room. It's one day. It only holds about 300 people. So if 100 people show up, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And it was a smashing success, but, and so we took a big leap after that, and did a hotel-based one the next year, and stayed in hotels for 4 or 5 years, maybe, before we went to a conference center, and ended up at Moscone in San Francisco and Javits in New York. And that's the path that we follow now. So we stay at hotels until we're break through that sort of 1,000 to 1,500 people range. And then when we get up into the multi-thousands of people, then we go to conference centers. And it's a conference expo. So we need floor space. We need places for people to put up booths and so on. It is a very complex, it's a scary decision. I don't know how complex it is, but it's very scary.
Yeah.
Because the way that the ticketing works and ticket sales work, for those of you that haven't run an event before, you know, we cross our 50% tickets sold threshold about 5 or 6 weeks before the event. So it is a total nail biter when you're expecting 4,000 people to show up and 2,000 of those tickets to be sold. And we've got maybe 5 weeks to go and we've only sold 1,000 tickets. And then just people start buying. So, or they don't. And you're, you know, washing dishes.
Yeah. Well, like what are some red flags, or what are some things you're like, oh, I will always make sure to ask about that moving forward when you've run into like a bad experience with a, you know, event or like a hotel or something like that?
I mean, I think really the thing to do is to make sure that you're not, unless you're working with an all-in-one kind of provider, like a Convene, or even, and a hotel can be helpful too in this way, where they can provide everything for you.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't go in it alone. Like, don't go in it having never done it before, because there are, when we get into ops and like actually building an event, it is a massive array of decisions that have to be made and trains that have to run on time for the thing to go off right. So early days, they were things like just negotiating absolutely everything and ticking and tying all of the line items that we're going to buy, with the $7 bagels, the $15, you know, cups of coffee, all that stuff. And ensuring you're looking at it not only from a business perspective, but also user perspective. There will always be complaints from your audience about your coffee's cold, or there's not enough, or you know that you serve no breakfast or whatnot. And so you're gonna have to make trade-offs. Like, how much can you risk on that first event is pretty tricky. But the thing is, if you have that engaged audience, and they're going to give you years to figure this out. Your first event could be a logistical disaster. But if you have that engaged audience that is actually not just engaged, but is devoted to you, they're going to be cheering for you. And they'll be like, you know what, the coffee was cold, but thank you for having this. It changed my career. It changed my company's trajectory. And then get to work on fixing all those problems that you didn't sort the first time.
Yeah. Randy, you're a famous author, podcaster, and also hosted a lot of your own events featured around you. You mentioned in the chat that there are like hidden fees and stuff like that you have to look out for.
Oh man, if you get a Union hotel in Las Vegas, you will just show up and they'll say, you shipped 25 boxes ahead. It's $25 a box reception fee, or $50 a box reception fee. It's $15 a day storage fee. I mean, it's insane. I mean, you could get hit with a $15,000 bill for that and never have it budgeted. If you do the Tropicana Hotel, they'll charge you $35 a page to receive a fax. Like I said, the air walls, you could have some crazy DJ. So, you know, you kind of have a checklist. Can be no pillars in the room, can be no air walls, things like that. Because they're, you know, and the big thing, and that was a good point he just made about when you start, you usually start with hotels, because you're not ready for 10,000 people convention centers or whatever. But with the hotels, they make their money from food and beverage or from a room block. And that's what they're looking to get you at. So you call and you say, hey, I need a meeting room. We're going to have 800 people. And they say, oh yeah, we have that. It's $2,500 for the day. 2 days, it's $5,000. Okay, but when they send you the contract, they're going to say, okay, you're asking for 800 people, so for 2 days, so we want 500 nights room block guarantee to get that price. Otherwise, the meeting is $20,000 a day.
Okay. Yeah. So if you don't meet that threshold, all of a sudden you owe a lot more money and that's like probably hidden in the contract somewhere.
Yeah. So the two things are the food and beverage, because they'll have a minimum,
Yeah.
or the room block, they'll have a minimum. And those are the things you got to negotiate like your life depends on it, because it does.
Yeah. Chris, what about you? What are your kinds of things and John, I haven't forgotten about you. I have some questions for you coming up soon. Chris.
I mean, it's important that the venue match what you're trying to do with the show, right? I mean, so if it's a regional show, you want to make sure it's a place that people can access easily. They can drive in, they can, parking's easy. You, as was just said, I mean, you're going to pay a lot if you're not booking a lot of room nights. You're going to pay a lot more for the venue, or have higher food and beverage menus than if you're doing an overnight show where you can get the hotel, a bunch of nights. We do, one type of event that we call our hosted buyer conferences, where the program is all the sponsors basically explaining what they do, and they pay for everything, right? And so they've paid $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 to be there. The attendees come for free. But we pick venues then that are outside of cities, so the attendees can't easily wander off, right? So you want a resort that's an hour out of town or 45 minutes out of town, where once you have them there, it's not easy for them to disappear and go somewhere else, that they've got to be there, to listen to the pitches that your sponsors have paid for. On the point, I mean, the details matter, and there's nothing worse than, reserving, a lot of space and then having a half empty room, because everybody can see that the event didn't make. So
Yeah.
you gotta make a good estimate about the kind of space, or be able to make the room look smaller. If, at the last minute, you don't have people show, so you have a plan to, add tables and, arrange the seating such that the room looks full, even if you only have 300 people in a room that's designed for 600.
Yeah.
Couple other just real quickies.
Sure.
Sorry, Simon, but
Sure.
like these places have to be contracted a year in advance. You again, just having an idea of how many people are going to show up. Don't be optimistic about it. Be the biggest pessimist you can. As an entrepreneur, that's sometimes hard, but assume that not very many people are going to come. And then if you just burst at the seams and it's a sellout, great, right? That is exactly what you want.
Yeah. And Bo, you seem to have a question for Boye about the
Totally.
kind of, yeah.
But John needs to speak. Pitch him a question.
Okay. So John, the question I had, I want to talk about marketing. Oh, he's pointing at something. I'm not sure.
I'm unmuted. Sorry,
okay.
Can I just weigh on
Sure.
I weigh in on this one just briefly?
Sure.
So a lot of people out there, so we kind of organically went, and long story, but anyway, very organically sort of started with really little things and slowly built up to like convention centers and so on. I would suggest, particularly people thinking, wow, that looks like a huge jump for me. I would suggest things like, there are museums and galleries and all kind of quirky venues in your city or in other cities that will typically not have a lot of these challenges. That they'll come with a challenge where you'll be doing a lot of DIY. You'll have to, they won't roll out everything for you. You'll have to kind of think through and get various things. But I think that can really de-risk things. Now, it depends on the nature of your audience. For some sort of shows, that sort of venue may just, well, it's too quirky, that's weird. But for other audiences, that might be great. So really think outside the box in terms of where you might hold something. There are loads of venues there. And we sort of, particularly, so we're in Australia, but we've done events all over the world, particularly in the US, in cities like Denver, where we've held events, and Atlanta. There are interesting places you can find. They're not like in the sticks, not outside. So explore options there. Don't think, oh, for my first event, really, we're going to think about hotels and convention centers. Really, like, get a foothold and learn what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
If people want to ask me more, we've got spreadsheets and things like that that can help you kind of get a sense of budgeting. We very much, to the point that folks are making, have a sense of where your break even is. You know, have a sense of where the various costs are, what are biting you, what, you know, really, you know, think through those things. But, you know, kind of ladder yourself up, I think, particularly for a lot of smaller, perhaps more B2C type people. That would be how would I be thinking about this.
Yeah, and like, you know, Boye, I'm sure you do all kinds of different venues just because like it might be a dinner at a restaurant, I'm assuming, or something that's within the sponsor's already existing space. Or I know you do things at like Coachella and Art Basel and stuff like that. So you probably have to be pretty flexible in terms of what kind of venues you're using. It's not like necessarily hotels and convention centers.
Yeah, basically what you said, we do all sorts of venues, big and small. I think the biggest thing that we try to look out for when we're working with venues is liquor license laws and anything food and beverage. I think we are just in a day and age where your event should have food and it should have something that people can drink. Food is actually one of the best ways to retain an audience, whether ticketed or free or whatever. And so for us, when we're really evaluating where to go, we try to take into account those costs. So if it's a blank space, before we put it into a budget, we need to know everything about catering and how much that costs. If it's a restaurant or a hotel or something, you know, we then take into account, will they allow us to bring in anything else, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we look at it. To answer Bo, your last note too, I think for us, when it comes to sort of thinking
Well,
through,
can you read? I don't think we ever
Go
read
ahead.
his question out loud. So for people who are listening at home, Bo, you want to just ask your question?
Yeah, I just want to dig a little deeper on that. The pitch that you're making, I wasn't quite sure if what you were saying is like, look, you understand this client so well that you bringing them an idea and then you're sort of wrapping yourself into that into that promotion or that I'm blanking on the word, but can you
He
dive
calls
into
it an
that a little bit more?
activation.
Yeah.
a
Right?
platform event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what I was trying to say is what we've done over time is initially when we were creating our brand, it was our entity. We were hosting events and experiences, and we wanted the brands to be a part of it. And we still do that. What we found though is that there was a lot of money instead of trying to sell something that we were doing in asking what they were already planning and wanting to do. So we actually got acquired a couple of years ago by an experiential marketing agency. They're very large. They produce events for anyone from Adidas to Netflix, all the Diageo brands. And so they really kind of inspired us to take an agency model approach to thinking through how we work with brands. And so for us, our ultimate goal is building the community and converting subscribers. And so with that particular vision that we had, we now could say, okay, yes, we could create this conference or we can create this panel and dinner series or whatever, which we still do. But we, in our meetings, we now ask, hey, X brand, do you plan to be at this festival? What initiatives do you have? Oh, we want to do this extravagant experience and you don't have a producer. We will do that for you, but we won't just execute it for you. We now want our brand on it. We want to be able to bring our people to that experience. And so we're kind of reverse engineering how we can be a part of big activations because we are being involved in producing things that we already know our partners want to be at. So they're going to spend upwards of 6 figures plus because it's something they already want to do. It's just an easier pitch. And then we advocate and say, you want our audience there because our audience is going to help. So that's an example of how we do it. I imagine if there was a different demographic, you could say, hey, I don't know, let's say it's like the dentistry world. You do dentistry conferences, you go and talk to all these people, but maybe you go to a new electric toothbrush and they want to do a huge production and activation, and you already have that expertise. You go and say, we'll produce it all for you, throw our logo on it, let us invite our people, and all of a sudden you have a massive event that, with one brand, and it was that much easier to accomplish. Obviously it's not easy, but we were just able to reverse engineer a little bit of our ask to sponsors by just really looking and asking what they wanted to do.
Sarah, we haven't heard from you in a while. I wanted to talk a little bit about marketing events, because I think, as several people said, it can be a real nail biter leading up to the event. Like, am I actually going to get all the people I said? You leveraged a podcast to really kind of jumpstart the Wise Women Council, right?
I did. And can you tell me more, like, what questions do you have about marketing?
Yeah, like in terms of like what you see like moves the needle in terms of calls to action, and like how you, like, obviously you charge a lot of money to upwards of $6,000 for it. That's a big leap that, through the sales funnel that someone has to make that commitment. What are some of the strategies, either through the podcasting or other things, that you would recommend in terms of pushing people through that sales funnel?
Yeah, so a lot of people talk about, creating value and communicating that value for your audience. And I think to add to that, you also need to understand the know, like, and trust, the KLT, which is, do they know you? Do they like you? Do they trust you? And I think that podcasting is a really unique medium because audio is actually, like they say, that our voice has the same unique fingerprint as a fingerprint, right? Like, it's got a texture. And so it builds that know, like, and trust factor a lot faster than email. So a lot of people do like marketing emails, email funnels, websites. So I would just ask myself, what parts of my campaign, what parts of my funnel activate know, like, and trust as quickly as possible? And I think these live video calls that you are doing can do it. I think podcasting really helps. The message that I get from my audience. So I've run the Startup Parent podcast for 5 years, and I interview people about what it's like to get pregnant, what it's like to add a kid to your family, and what it's like to work once you have kids. And what I hear consistently from people is that they find me by searching an Apple podcast for, like, pregnant female founder. They listen to me for 9 months without saying a thing. I never know who they are. And then they email me and they say, you don't know it, but you were my best friend through pregnancy.
Yeah.
I listen to you every day. And I'm like, that's amazing. And I have, like, what's your name? And that's a long lead time, right?
Yeah.
And my conversion is really happening when they have a 2-year-old, because nobody can do anything extra, like, with under 2-year-old. So I have all these moms with 2-year-olds being like, you have no idea, you saved my life, and now I'm ready to, like, invest all my money in you. I don't know if that's applicable to everyone here, but I think that, like, how you do the know, like, and trust factor is, it's what they talk about having voice in your writing. It's about disclosure. It's about being personable. I don't know what you would do with events. I think giving people a taste of what it's like, and really knowing what it would be like to hang out with you, right?
Yeah.
What does your event do that's different than anywhere else? Because I can go to something expo in Las Vegas to meet all the brands if I have to, but, like, why do I get to spend time with you, and why am I going to spend my money doing that? Like, also, is it going to be fun, right? All of those different pieces.
Yeah, like I saw the highest conversion for my office hours subscribers once I started taking, so I do like 3 a month. I take one of those recordings per month and put it for free on YouTube and promote it with my newsletter. And I also release it as a free podcast recording. And that drives more conversions because they get to see what's happening. They get to, they get a sense of FOMO. They're like, oh, I want to be able to participate in this. And that drives like a ton of subscribers for me every month whenever I release that free one. John, what do you find to be the most effective marketing channel? And Ross, I haven't forgotten about you. I have a few questions for you coming up. Like what, in terms of like what moves the needle as you're leading up to the final days when you're trying to fill seats, what are your kind of go-to marketing tactics?
Email. And I suspect a lot of people here are well placed there. You have mailing lists, people, you have a relationship with people. So I think that email is absolutely critical. And I think part of it, and then part of it is give people a reason to make a decision now, right? Like, why do I make a decision now? Yeah, I want to go. That's interesting. So we worked out very early on, nearly 20 years ago, when prices go up, people register, right? In the lead up to that. And I don't think it's because they don't want to pay that extra $100. I just think it gives you permission to be right there and giving them a reason to make a decision now. And the challenge then becomes, yeah, they put it off. And suddenly, yeah, it's an hour's flight away, or it's something on my calendar. And I really wanted to go, but maybe I'll do it next year. So you're kind of moving forward, reasons to make a decision, I think, are really important. So, we really, I guess, to some extent, we converted a community in the relatively early days of web design and development, particularly in Australia. We converted that from people who met up occasionally, kind of knew each other online, to gave them somewhere to go and meet in person. And that was kind of the early days. And over time, we kind of have those core kind of people continue to be in our community. And then it's the people that they employ, that they manage, that they connect with, who get converted, right? But your core is those people who listen to what you have to say on a regular basis, and then giving them an important reason to make a decision sooner rather than later. That will be kind of tactically what I would really focus on.
Yeah. Ross, you have a newsletter that you kind of started as kind of like just a side thing to go along with it, but then during the pandemic it became like a huge part of your business. How does that newsletter, what are the synergies between the newsletter and the actual trade show events?
Yeah, so our newsletter is called the Urban Mobility Weekly, and it writes about sustainable urban mobility industry, mainly in Europe. Our trade show is really a business to government trade show. The newsletter is, funny enough, become less important post-COVID. And we haven't tried to monetize it, just because we did some research and we asked our community, would they pay subscription? They said no. And we were making some money out of webinars, quite good money during COVID. And then everybody got really tired of doing webinars and wanted to go back to physical. And that's when we started these what we call city summits, these one-day conferences. What we learned with those one-day conferences was that the size of audience was not that important. So we go for 200 people. What was really important was the quality of that audience. So can you curate the right people, that your sponsors get the right interactions? And then can you amplify that physical event through digital media, through our own channel? We have 14,000 subscribers, and obviously through LinkedIn, which is is infinite. So what we're seeing,
you have 14,000 newsletter subscribers?
Correct. Yeah. But what we're seeing now is that, if you can do a small event in a great venue with a great quality audience, and the right people are posting on LinkedIn, hey, Simon speaking, great to hear him about autonomous vehicles. And that is now become extremely valuable, whereas you couldn't ever imagine that before. But our next City Summit events, we're really looking at them as, a way of just filming and posting on LinkedIn, almost creating a kind of live show on LinkedIn, because that is so valuable to our paying clients now. It's become extremely valuable of late. The urban mobility community sits very strongly on LinkedIn. So our big focus is things like autonomous vehicles, shared mobility, electrification, obviously e-mobility, all of that kind of stuff. And that community sits very strongly on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I just want to recognize that we are up at 4:30. So, and as always, these things always run a little bit long. I will not be offended if you have budgeted out only an hour and have to drop off. If you do drop off and you feel comfortable with it, definitely feel free to, leave your email address in the chat so other people can reach out to you. Chris, before we move on, like what about marketing channels that you find? You have humongous audience and you have multiple publications in each industry, so there's like crossover readerships between multiple publications. how do you think about marketing in terms of the different levers that you're pulling from when you first announced the conference to leading up to the final days?
Yeah, I mean, the program really matters, and that your target, that the content that is going to be delivered at the event, matches up with the audience that you're pitching it to. I mean, ours are business events, and so they're looking for people who have insight or or names from companies that they aspire to be like. A lot of times we'll have advisory boards from the industry that we're trying to reach that help us develop the program, and identify speakers and who they want to hear from. But yeah, then we market it across all of those channels, which a lot of them are newsletters, and that's where or emails, that's the best response really for driving that. I would say too that having the attendees pay something to be there makes them more committed. We have some free events, and registration for a free event is much easier to bail out of psychologically than registration that you've paid something for, even if it's a nominal amount.
Yeah. Ross, you do a trade show versus a conference. What are I mean, one, what is the difference? And two, what are some factors that you should consider, some people listening to this, like maybe if they're in the B2B space or, something similar, that they should be doing a trade show instead of a conference?
Yeah, so I think, the first advice is if you're going to do a trade show, be careful because the costs are huge. And we went in too early with the trade show. We lost a lot of money. It was a big mistake. We should have started with conferences and, community building. So my advice is, beware of doing a trade show straight away. The second point is that if you're going to do a trade show, it works really well if the exhibitors have product to sell as opposed to services. So what's happening in the trade show industry, those of you I'm sure will agree with me, is that companies are taking less and less space now. So in the old days of trade shows, Microsoft, because it's a big brand, would take 200 square meters and demonstrate the size of the company through the size of its booth. Now what Microsoft would want to do is have good thought leadership, good stage presence, be on stage with other interesting people, good networking dinner afterwards. So, you see these huge trade show centers all over Europe, and, the halls are just empty and emptier. The motor shows in the old days would take 8-10 halls. Now they take 3 or 4 halls if they're lucky. So there's a massive amount of space in trade shows. Our trade show is only 1 hall. And every year we have more clients taking less space and wanting more other services with content, thought leadership, connecting, networking. So if you have a community that is selling services, beware of a trade show. What is your community wanting to achieve? Is it showing product? Trade show works. Is it finding the right people? Lead generating? Conferences work. Is it thought leadership? Is it publicity, profile, LinkedIn, short conferences with lots of video, lots of photography, pushing it back into LinkedIn? So really understand what they want, because they all want something different. Our little niche that we've figured out is that our community, because we're rebuilding the way cities work and we're rebuilding mobility from the ground up, actually want to be with policymakers. They want to sit with deputy mayors and say, listen, don't ban scooters in Paris, or listen, the electrification program is not going to be sufficient. We know this, we're working on the ground, and cities want to have those conversations because they're trying to figure out how to change their cities. So, that's the niche we found after losing a bit of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'll just add to that. I mean, big trade shows can make a lot of money, but you can also screw up a perfectly good conference by trying to turn it into a trade show. We've made that mistake before, and it's really hard then to go back to a conference after you've made the mistake. And it's a big mea culpa to say, hey, we just blew it trying to turn this into a trade show, and it really should have been a conference.
in what way was it?
Great veteran speak, great veteran advice. Yeah.
Chris, in what way was it did you blow it? Like, what does that mean to really screw up?
Well, you have to have foot traffic for a trade show. You have to have enough people willing to walk through your exhibit hall, to make the exhibitors feel like it was worth their money. And that's just it's a whole nother layer of expense and a whole nother level of number of attendees that are willing to come and walk through a hall and talk to people. And if they're not willing to do that, then your exhibitors are quite unhappy with you, if they've come and stood there in a booth for a day or two and not had the level of interaction that they wanted.
Yeah.
Let me throw this on that
real
quickly.
Yeah.
So one of the great things about having multiple different products and services is when we blow it for a client at one of our conferences, let's say they have bad placement or we screwed up their booth design or something like that, we've got digital products we can sell to them. So we'll say, hey, look, take this $20,000 virtual webinar as an apology, and we'll just give it to you for free. Costs us nothing, makes them feel better, and those go a long way to sort of smoothing ruffled feathers.
Yeah, Sarah's asking in the comments to talk about what it means to blow it with clients.
For us, it's going to be, again, it's probably going to be foot traffic, missing the target demographic. We actually recently held a conference in London where we went in very optimistically about a Web3 fintech crossover conference. And this was while crypto was cratering and we just couldn't gather a very large audience. And we had some great sponsors there. And they're like, gee whiz, we were hoping for like at least 600 people and you just didn't deliver that. And so we just didn't have the number of bodies. And so that's blowing it. And then we're like, look, yeah, but we have this giant database. We can still reach your audience. We'll do some other things digitally.
Yeah. Let me throw this question out to the group, and maybe Randy might be best to talk about this since he's a little bit more, a one person, although I'm sure he has a staff and stuff like that. But like, Chris and Bo and a few others, you have your own event staff. You're large enough to have that at this point, who are veterans. If you're going in alone, would you advise, rather than trying to do it all yourself, like I'm sure there are event organizers you can outsource stuff to. Do you recommend doing that?
Definitely.
Randy? How about you?
Absolutely. I have a guy I use. When I finish talking, I'll find his email and I'll put it in the chat. He's the guy it's just a guy who works out of his home, but he's the guy who negotiates those contracts. And because the thing you see, like with the room blocks, is everybody does Airbnb now. Why would they pay $180 for a night at the hotel? They get an Airbnb for, or they get, so he's like checking the rooming list, checking the blocks. Hey, wait a minute, you had construction going on in the other room. Okay, we're going to knock $20,000 off your bill. We're sorry for that.
Yeah.
Hey, there were pillars. We said there could be no pillar. Okay, we're going to knock 30 grand off.
So that pays for his consulting fee right there.
He has never cost me a penny. I might be $20,000 for an event, but he saves me more than that every time.
Yeah.
And just so people know, I'm coming at this. I'm a professional speaker for 25 years. I've spoke to more than 2 million people in 50 different countries. So I'm looking at it as the guy on the platform. And I did have a staff of 15 or 16 people. I sold the division that did all my products and stuff back a decade or more ago. And now everybody who works for me is virtual. So I have no employees. I only have, contractors, vendors. And the other thing, you're talking about new people. So here's two things I would say to new people. Bo is killing it. He doesn't need my advice, right? Boye's got, what a great thing he's got going on, right? But if you're new and starting out, first of all, ask the question, am I doing a destination event or am I doing local events? Because if you're the chiropractic newsletter, you may go around and you're going to do a tour and you're going to go to 15 main cities and all the local chiropractors are going to come to your event. Or you're going to do the annual chiropractor palooza, and then you're going to pick a destination city. And like you said, only if it's January, you don't go from Chicago to Tampa, you got to go Chicago to Orlando, because Tampa doesn't have many direct flights. You look for a hub, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Miami,
Charlotte,
where there's airline hub, particularly if you're pulling for international people. Like San Antonio's an amazing place to do events. but there's no direct flights there. They have to go to Houston or Dallas and take an extra one, and that'll hurt attendance a little. So just figure out, am I doing local or am I doing destination? And then the other thing is, don't get seduced by the dark side of the force of I do B2C or I do B2B. There's no such thing. It's P2P, people to people.
Interesting.
For me, yeah, and I do a lot of events in a lot of different ways, always as part of building out a media or selling a newsletter or things like that. But ask yourself, the better question is, do I have employees coming? Do I have executives coming? Or do I have entrepreneurs coming? If I'm marketing to Simon Owens, who publishes a newsletter, he might want an event on the weekend because he's busy Monday to Friday, and he's going to go and pay $1,500 to go to some boot camp thing on the weekend because he's an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's Simon who works for Wells Fargo and he's a mid-level manager, he wants it during his working hours. And if it's a 2-day event, he's going to go more if it's on a Thursday, Friday, because now he loaded his work week to 3 days and he's got 2 days he's out of the office. Nobody's checking on him. There's free donuts and, snacks.
Yeah.
But if he's the president or the CFO or the COO of Wells Fargo, he's going because he really wants content and he doesn't care if it's in the middle of the week. He wants value. You know what I mean? So look for who reads your newspaper or your newsletter. Are they an employee? Are they an executive? Or are they an entrepreneur? Because that's the real segmentation you want to start with when you're first beginning events.
Yeah, that speaks to my own anxiety about when to just schedule these office hours. And now for this one, I actually reached out to all my guest speakers and had them give me windows of time. So I based it on their availability, which took out a little bit more of the anxiety for me. But that's definitely, a good point of like trying to figure out like what is the most optimized place and optimized time, for your core demographic that's going to come. Okay, we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to go ahead and end this. Oh, shoot, not that. I'm going to end this recording.